Okay, part 2 of Chapter 18. Pick up now with classification of corporations. We can also classify corporations as close or not close. Close corporations are those whose shares are held by relatively few people and is operated more like a partnership. Sometimes there are reservations about who can buy stock in that corporation in order to keep it close. So as I said, restriction of transferability. S corporations are another type of corporation. We talked about S corporations a little bit before in comparison to LLCs. Before LLCs became popular, S corporations filled sort of the function that is largely filled today by LLCs, and that is to provide a shield against liability, but to avoid federal taxation, double taxation. Okay, so the requirements for an S corporation are you have to be domestic. You cannot be foreign. You cannot be a member of an affiliated group of corporations. The shareholders have to be individuals, estates, and certain trusts and tax-exempt organizations. So you can't have other corporations, for example. You can have no more than 100 shareholders. You can only have one class of stock. And no shareholder can be a non-resident alien. There's no double taxation for S corporations. Only dividends are taxed to the shareholders as personal income. Okay, I want to go back to this before we go on to the next slide. Okay, so other than a few things that I pointed out as the difference between S corporations and LLCs, why would one choose one over the other if one of those things that I pointed out is not applicable? And the answer to that question is, I don't know. I got interested in this issue about 5 years ago. I sent an email to a couple of accountants, and I sent emails to a couple of attorneys that do this kind of work, and I got different answers, and not clear answers, and conflicting answers. So I throw my hands up in the air and say, I can't answer that question other than what we've already talked about. What I do see is that LLCs seem to be more popular. And I at once thought maybe it had something to do with older attorneys preferring S-corps because that was before LLCs became popular, but I'm not sure that would answer the question either. At any rate, that's what it is. Okay. We have professional corporations that we talked about before, such as lawyers. Benefit corporations is a for-profit corporation that seeks to have a material positive impact on society and has to comply with certain statutory requirements. Their purpose, accountability, and transparency is different than traditional corporations, and don't confuse them with non-profit corporations. Okay, so I don't know if we have any slides on it. If we do, you'll get repetition, but just let me quickly point out a couple things about non-profits. To be a non-profit corporation means a couple of things. One is you don't pay any taxes. Number two, and that includes things like sales tax, etc. Number two, people who contribute to you get to take, or used to get to take, a tax deduction. With the changes in the tax law last year, I'm not sure if that's true anymore. You can check with your accountant on that. But at any rate, we all know when you write a check to the American Heart Association, you can take that as a tax deduction. So that's one of the differences. To create a nonprofit corporation, you have to first incorporate in your state, and then you have to get approved by the Internal Revenue Service of the federal government as a nonprofit. And to do that, you have to meet the requirements of Section 503C1, which sets forth that you have to be either an educational, a scientific, different types of organizations in order to meet those requirements. I'm not going to go into any more depth than that. I will say that that you can easily make mistakes in doing that. I once had to help a nonprofit correct their mistakes in order to get tax-exempt status. Okay, so in incorporating, your procedures are to select the state where you want to incorporate. Now this is interesting because you do not have to incorporate in the state where you are. You can incorporate in another state. In fact, until recent times, many corporations chose to incorporate in Delaware because Delaware had very friendly laws regarding corporations, and because the laws in Delaware, because of the number of corporations, had been well developed by the courts. Secure a corporate name just like we did with LLCs. You have to check with the Secretary of State to see if your name is available, and you can then use it, or you can reserve that name. The name you choose has to include something that indicates you're a corporation, such as Acme Incorporated, Acme Corporation, Acme Limited, or the initials Acme Inc., Acme Corp., or Acme Ltd. It cannot be misleading to the public. For example, it can't indicate it was formed for a purpose other than what its actual purpose is. You have to prepare your articles of incorporation, just like with an LLC, you have your articles of organization. And they have to include these things, not very much. Again, if you go to the Secretary of State's website, they actually have a form that includes these items that are the minimum required. You can do more, but these are the minimum. And I'm not going to read them to you. You can see them on the slide. You do have to have the name and address of each incorporator, and then you file that with the Secretary of State. And then you will, if you're approved, you get your charter from the state. The provisions depend on one state to another, but generally these are the things that are required, and those are what are set forth in the Model Business Code Act, Model Business Corporations Act, excuse me. Again, we have what are called default provisions, and that is if you incorporate and your articles do not contain a provision covering a specific subject, then these are some of the default provisions that the law provides. And you can see what they are. I'm not going to read them out to you. But for example, a corporation has perpetual existence. If you don't state in your articles, then they have perpetual existence. Okay? In most states, including Georgia, your corporate existence begins upon the filing of the Articles of Incorporation. And you get your certificate of incorporation mailed to you after they've been approved. Okay, so we're going to stop there with Part 2 of Chapter 18. And the magic word for Chapter 18 is bylaws.